Okay, I've just got one question for folks who claim that Doctor Who has gotten too political in the last few years. What show were you watching before? So, in the somehow still ongoing discussion in the wake of Jodie Whittaker being cast as the Doctor, there's an argument I still see being cropped up, and of quite a fair bit actually, and by people with a negative view about that casting and other things that they consider to be connected to it. And the specific nuances of exactly what people say will vary, but the gist of the argument goes like this. I'm not sexist, but they did this for political reasons, and I don't like how politics are being pushed in the show so much these days. Doctor Who should not be political, it should just be fun space adventures. Now, as a rule of thumb, I don't like to pick out specific arguments that I see happening in my comment sections and do responses to them, except in instances where they keep cropping up over and over and over again. This happened before when I had to do a video explaining why Jodie Whittaker cast as the Doctor is not the same thing as the 2016 remake of Ghostbusters, and this argument I keep seeing happening over and over and over again, so now I do feel the need to respond to it, if for no other reason than I am done responding to the comments directly. So this entire argument, whether being made genuinely or being used as a smokescreen because people don't want to own up to the fact that they're just not comfortable with a female Doctor, either way, it doesn't matter, seems to be rooted in the idea that Doctor Who used to be fun adventures in space with a wacky character who's kind of unpredictable. But in recent times it's gotten all political, and that is a betrayal of what the show used to be. And this idea, it just doesn't hold water. I mean, when exactly was this magical, mythical time when Doctor Who was not political? I mean, if I look at when it comes up in my comment sections, people really seem to zero in on Series 10 because they bring up Bill and they bring up episodes like Oxygen, which was a very pointed comment on capitalism. So, was it non-political earlier in Capaldi's run, before Series 10? Like when they had a prominent deaf character in Before the Flood, Under the Lake two-parter? Or the very blatant Muslim extremist parallel in the Zygon Invasion Inversion? Or the clumsy abortion metaphor that was Kill the Moon? Or the exploration of Danny Pink's PTSD? No, obviously this doesn't work. That's all political. So, okay, Capaldi's era. That can't be it. So what about earlier? What about before that? What about Smith? The days of the 11th Doctor with the wacky hair and the bow tie and things weren't so political. It's not like the show ever dealt with things like the exploitation of animals for the benefit of human society in The Beast Below, or the use of apocalyptic rhetoric and fear-mongering as a means of controlling people in The Crimson Horror, or dehumanization and personhood as tackled in The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People, or quite possibly the most frank look at depression ever put on film in any television show in Vincent and the Doctor, or how the Cold War was really about... Okay, well, you get the idea. All right, so you know what? Maybe it's Moffat. Maybe Moffat's the problem. Moffat's where this Doctor Who got totally political. So let's go back to the Russell T Davies era. Those were the times. No political messages in those. It's not like there was anything about the danger of mob mentality in Midnight, or dehumanization again in The Doctor's Daughter. It's not like the Planet of the Ood is about an exploited underclass, or that the villain in Voyage of the Damned is a caricature of a businessman. Oh dear, I think we found a pattern here as well. What else we got? 42 is a hazards of strip mining natural resources story. Rise of the Cybermen, The Long Game, Bad Wolf, and The Idiot's Lantern all tackle the idea of mass media and entertainment being used to placate and control a population. Turn Left, Fires of Pompeii, Waters of Mars, New Earth, and The End of Time all tackled the idea of one person's value against the greater good in some fashion or another. Dalek, The Empty Child, and arguably most of Series 1 is dealing with the impact and unseen consequences of war, both on those who fought it and those who were caught in the wake of it. And that's not even getting into the casualness with which the show handled interracial relationships and the omnisexual Jack Harkness. But okay, look. The show does not begin and end in 2005 with New Who. We've got the classic era. So maybe it is the classic era of Doctor Who that is back when things were fun and not politically charged. Hang on. Monster Peladon featured a mining strike and was broadcast at a time when mining strikes were happening in Britain. Its precursor, Curse of Peladon had the planet dealing with whether or not to enter a galactic federation, which was, again, a very topical and blatant allegory to the then current debate as to whether or not Britain should enter into the European Economic Community. The Green Death is a pollution will kill us all story. The Sunmakers is a vicious jab at taxation written by a man who'd just gone through a really bad tax experience. The Happiness Patrol features a parody of Margaret Thatcher, who was Prime Minister at the time. The Cybermen are all about unchecked technological advancement at the cost of humanity. The epic The War Games is all about the value of interventionism versus the doctrine of non-interference. The Demons features the Master masquerading as a religious figure who's hypnotizing his followers. That's just the stuff that I could latch onto, and I don't have nearly the level of knowledge on the classic era Doctor Who that I have on New Who. But surely, somewhere in the history of the show, there had to have been a time where it wasn't delivering some political message. That must have been the case at one point. And to be fair, it was. And that period of no overt political statements lasted one story, 4 episodes, and about 100 minutes. Because the second story ever done back in 1963 was the Daleks. And the Daleks are Nazis. That's not supposition, that's not speculation, that's not modern reinterpretation. Dalek creator Terry Nation was very upfront and blatant about the influence of Nazis on the creation of the Daleks. This was important to him to the point that he made very certain in Genesis of the Daleks that when we see the Khaleds, which is the race that will eventually be mutated and become the Daleks, before they're even in the metal casing tanks, they are in military garb and behaving in a fashion that is reminiscent of Nazis. The Doctor's most iconic foes, there since the second story ever broadcast, were deliberately created as a science fiction take on a real-life military presence and political party. So the idea that Doctor Who has only recently become politically charged is simply without merit. This show, since the beginning, has repeatedly and consistently made a point of telling stories that reflect something going on or that had gone on in the real world. Was it all stories? No, but these are not outliers. It consistently came up over and over and over again. Now, if you want to make the argument that you don't like the political points that the show is making lately, that's fair enough, but you need to own up that that's what your problem is. What you can't do is you can't hide behind this idea that the show used to not be political at all, but now it is, and that's your problem. Own up to the fact that it's not the presence of the politics, but the specific political beliefs themselves that you take issue with. Because this show has always been a platform for political ideas, and if we are being honest, by and large, progressive and liberal leaning ideas. Now, if you've been a fan since childhood, it is a distinct possibility that when you first started watching the show, you didn't recognize the political themes. You didn't know enough about the outside world and what was going on in politics to draw the connections and to see them. I know that discoveries like that has been the case for me for all sorts of stuff that I've loved since I was a kid. I revisit it as an adult and go, whoa, there's this whole other thing going on that I didn't even recognize. But not noticing them because you weren't politically tuned in enough to recognize the connections doesn't mean that they weren't there. So stop making the argument that the show used to not be political and now is, and that's what you're hung up about. If you don't like the specific politics being pushed, talk about that. Make that argument. If you feel that the show used to handle political topics with more grace and subtlety than it currently does, then make that argument. I don't personally believe that's the case, but I am willing to listen if that's the argument you're prepared to make. But to say that you wish the show wasn't political at all is to say you wish the show wasn't about anything except spaceships and lasers. But if the show was stripped of its political ideas, it wouldn't even be recognizable as Doctor Who. So many elements of what is fundamental to this show, to this character, would be gone. There'd be no Ood. There'd be no Cybermen. There'd be no Daleks. Heck, I would argue there wouldn't even be a Doctor, not as we know the character. Over the course of this show, the Doctor has been many, many things, including, but not limited to, an interventionist, a revolutionary, an anarchist, and a pacifist. These are all political ideals. These are who the Doctor is. This is what the show is. So stop making an argument that simply has no merit. Again, if you want to tell me that the specific political messages being pushed you don't like, tell me that, and we'll talk about that. But to make this claim that the show is pushing politics when it didn't used to is simply intellectually dishonest. It's not true. Don't make that argument because it has no basis. Make the argument that you're afraid to make. The argument that actually has you explain why the specific political views being pushed you are not okay with, or why you are not okay with the specific means in which they're being pushed. You can't argue against their simple presence, because they've always been present. Political views are in the core and in the DNA of this show, and they have been since the beginning. Doctor Who is a political show. It always has been, and it should continue to be. So that's my word on this particular topic. What are your thoughts? Whatever they are, if you can keep them civil, please drop them down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast available on iTunes and Stitcher. And until next time, this council is adjourned.